And meanwhile, there are constantly new revelations, new reports, new evidence and footage of Israeli forces shooting and killing their own civilians on October 7th. Ali and Asa, both of you have been reporting on some of these new so-called friendly fire incidents. Bring us up to date on what's happening with that.
Yeah, yesterday, along with David Sheen, I published an article at the Electronic Intifada. And there it is. The headline is Released Captive Tells How Israeli Fire Killed Kibbutz Resident. And the focus of the story is an Israeli woman called Shani Goren, who lived in a settlement called Kibbutz near Oz, which is one of these settlements in the so-called Gaza envelope. And on October 7th, she was taken by Palestinian fighters along with several other kibbutz residents and with the intent to take them captive in Gaza. She was actually taken to Gaza and spent, I think it was 55 days there before being released and returned safely home in November during the truce and the prisoner exchange. And she gave a long interview about her experience on Israel's Channel 12, one of its main TV channels, to Ilana Dayan. And Ilana Dayan, some people might remember, is the famous Israeli journalist who helped General Barak Hiram try to cover up his shelling of a home in Kibbutz Be'eri on October 7th, killing a number of Israeli civilians there. But in this interview, Ilana Dayan is talking to Shani Goren. And this was broadcast in Israel just last month, so very recently. Even though she was released in November, she didn't really speak about her experiences until very recently. And let's just start with showing a clip from this interview, which we have translated and subtitled, and you can watch the full segment in the article on the Electronic Intifada, but we're just going to show a clip now.
השעה 6:45 ואנחנו במשדר חדשות מיוחד בעקבות מטח טילים ורקטות שנורה לשטח ישראל.
מתקשרת לעמית, הוא אומר לי, קומי, נעלי את הדלת, סגרי את הכל, את לא זזה מהבית. תרים את הידית של הממד ותישארי שם.
עמית, אחיה, לא היה בניר עוז באותה שבת, שירה אחותה, הייתה בקיבוץ, וגם החברה הטובה.
Yeah, let's pause it there for a second, Tamara. Let's go back to the beginning, and I'm actually going to read or summarize the subtitles because I know that some people are listening, and I think that will be helpful for people. So this is in Hebrew, obviously, and we hear the narration from Ilana Dayan, and then we're going to hear Shani Goren speaking. It's 6:45, and this is a special news broadcast. In the wake of a volley of missiles and rockets shot into Israeli territory, I call my brother Amit, and he tells me, get up, lock the door, shut everything, do not step out of the house. Lift the handle of the safe room and stay there. Her brother Amit was not in Nir Oz that Saturday. Her sister Shira was at the kibbutz, as was her good friend Arbel Yehud, still at her home at this stage. I spoke with Arbel. We were both stressed. This is Shira talking. We couldn't speak. We said we loved each other. We hoped they wouldn't reach us and nothing would happen. From that moment, she was on the line with her brother's partner the whole time, the narrator says. And then Shani, Nofar called me. I spoke with her for 2 hours. You just held each other on the line. Yes, later she told me it had been 2 hours. From my perspective, we spoke for half an hour. I tell her, I'm scared, and she says, breathe. And then suddenly there were noises in the house. I whispered to her, Nofar, they're here, they're here. She tells me, okay, be quiet, breathe. I'm with you on the line. I was covered under the blanket. crunched up, trying to stay close to the closet in case they come. And then the door opened quietly and they tossed in a grenade. Let's stop there with this video. Tamara, I actually think I wanted to show another clip as well that I didn't send you. While I talk about this, this is the clip that we cut yesterday for Twitter, the short clip where she's talking by the fence and telling what happened when that happened. I apologize to Tamara for not having provided her with that clip earlier. But what I want to say about Shani Goren, who you see in this video, is she tells the whole story to Ilana Dayan of how she, the Palestinian fighters entered the kibbutz. She tells a very important story. You see the beginning of it there, where they come into her home. She is alone at home. They have total control of the kibbutz. And there's another aspect to this story where what I'm going to show you in a minute is the clip where she's explaining the friendly fire incident. That's the clip that we cut yesterday. But in this incident, she talks about when the fighters come in, she's completely alone in the house in bed. They have complete control over the kibbutz. And I think there's an important point here which relates to what we've spoken about in previous incidents, in previous live streams regarding the allegation of mass rape. And we talked about the really fraudulent UN report last week. But this incident that Shani Goren tells, if anything, I think is relevant to that, because they come in, she's in her bedroom alone, she's in bed. According to her description, she is wearing very little in bed, and she's alone with these fighters. And the first thing they do is they grab some clothes from her closet and they tell her, get dressed. And of course, that can't tell you that no sexual violence happened anywhere else. But what it does provide you with is an example of where, if these fighters had been ordered, as Israel claims, to carry out those kinds of attacks, this was the perfect opportunity. And nothing like that happened to her there or in Gaza. And I just want to note that. And again, Tamara, I'm sorry for messing up with the video clip I sent you. I don't know if we have the friendly fire clip now that we wanted to, that was in our feed from yesterday. But basically, what Shani Goren talks about is when the Palestinians had secured the kibbutz and they'd captured a number of people, they put them on a tuk-tuk. This is an open cart tractor that's used around the kibbutz for landscaping and so on. And they started to drive back to Gaza. And I think we have that clip now where Shani Goren tells us what happened as they headed towards the boundary with Gaza. And this is, yeah. So let's just pause it so that I can give the narration as well. And so, again, it switches between the narrator and the testimony of Shani Goren. So let's go. What will happen in another moment has almost never been discussed until now. The captives are already in the vehicle, surrounded by terrorists on all sides, on the way to Gaza. We exit from here, turn left, drive on this path we see here. Yes, we drive, and then there is a right turn, and we see nothing. What do you mean you see nothing? Nothing, no army, totally empty. You still expect them? Yes, you always expect to see them, Shani responds. She won't see a single soldier, the narrator says, but suddenly from the sky, a sound is heard that sparks an ember of hope. And 150 meters before the border, we suddenly hear a combat helicopter in the skies. The combat helicopter coming up over them sees from the cockpit what obviously he never could have imagined. Streams of terrorists and Israeli civilians, among them being taken captive to Gaza. The helicopter accompanied you for a fair while. I don't remember exactly how long, but it was there. We say, good, maybe the army is here, maybe something is happening. And something, in fact, from the helicopter's direction within minutes happens. And then suddenly it opened fire with a volley coming from above. Yes. The time is now 11:30 a.m. The helicopter pilot makes a decision in a nearly impossible situation. It aims gunfire at the small vehicle laden with terrorists, but also with Israeli captives. It was a terrifying moment. It lasts just seconds. I lower my head, Shani says. I realize my pants are all ripped and covered in blood. I raise my head and I see dominoes, all the terrorists dead. And then one of the captives, Doron's mother, suffers a lethal wound from the gunfire. Sadly, Efrat Katz was killed on the spot. And that's a picture of Efrat Katz, who's 68, a resident of a kibbutz near Oz. Do you manage to see Efrat? Yes. That's one of the memories you're trying to erase. Yes. To erase. To erase. Yes. So that's just a clip of Shani Goren recounting the killing of 68-year-old Efrat Katz from kibbutz near Oz, who was riding on that tuk-tuk. And her daughter Doron, Efrat Katz's daughter Doron, and her two children were also on that cart, on that motorized cart. Doron was injured. Shani Goren was, another woman called Naomi Chendekel was also severely injured and also lived to tell the tale. They all tell the same story of the helicopter coming and firing without regard to who was on the cart. And just an interesting note about Efrat Katz, and also the history of kibbutz near Oz. Tamara, maybe we can show the site, the decolonizer site that I showed you earlier, and scroll down to the handwritten notes that are on that page. But an organization called Decolonizer, which does education about the Nakba, actually held an exhibition in Al-Ma'in. Al-Ma'in is the name of the village that existed, where kibbutz near Oz and several other kibbutzes now sit near Gaza. And this village of Al-Ma'in, most of that land was inhabited by and worked and belonged to the Abu Sittah family. You'll hear the name Abu Sittah in many reports from Gaza. Several of our writers at the Electronic Intifada are named Abu Sittah. And of course, famously, there's the Palestinian geographer and historian Salman Abu Sittah, who's authored several important books about the Nakba, including the Atlas of Palestine. And this exhibition was hosted in the last standing house of Al-Ma'in. And several kibbutz residents from the nearby kibbutzes actually came and attended the exhibition. One of them was Efrat Katz. And if we scroll down, we actually see there's a handwritten note from Efrat Katz that she wrote after it may not be visible on this page, but she actually wrote a handwritten message where she just said that she regretted that the people who are originally from that land that she now lives on are no longer there. But I just thought this connection was so poignant, because Salman Abu Sittah wrote a few years ago in an article about this exhibition. I think this is the page, Tamara, I'll drop this in the chat here, that has the handwritten note from Efrat Katz, maybe not showing up. But Salman Abu Sitta also wrote about this exhibition and what he remembers as a little boy during the Nakba, when he became a refugee. And he actually says, yeah, there's the handwritten note on the left from Efrat Katz. She talks about, I mean, it's just sort of expressing this positive sentiment. Although most of the people who went to the exhibition, according to Salman Abu Sitta, he even writes, the angriest comments and indeed threats came from an old kibbutznik over 80 who witnessed and participated in the attacks on Al Ma'in. And he says, again, this is Salman Abu Sitta writing about the attack on Al Ma'in by Zionist militias, the Haganah, which actually happened on the 14th of May, 1948. So that was the very day that the State of Israel was declared. The Zionists attacked Al Ma'in and destroyed and burned homes, demolished the school that was built in 1920, blew up the motorized well and the flour mill. That's what Salman Abu Sitta wrote. He also writes, they were resisted bravely for several hours by 15 Palestinian defenders armed by old rifles. As a child, I witnessed the smoldering remains of my village while I was huddled with other children and women in a nearby ravine. I never saw a Jew before and did not know who the attackers were or why they came to destroy our life. And I just thought of that image of the Palestinian fighters on this land in 1948, trying to defend the village. And then 75 years later, in a sense, the reverse, the Palestinians coming to reclaim their land and Zionists defending the stolen land and the new colonies that have been put on it. That's sort of a tangent to the story, but what the story tells us, Shani Goren's testimony, is really of another significant data point of how much friendly fire there was on October 7th.
On a recent episode of the Makdisi Street podcast, Salman Abu Sitta was talking about Al Ma'in and his childhood and his expulsion and the kibbutz, the settlement of Nir Oz. And he said that actually, 10 years before, the residents of Al Ma'in safe housed Palestinian Jews who were being repressed by British forces at the time in the 1930s, and they hid Jews in their homes. They accepted them and welcomed them and protected them. And then Salman says that 10 or 12 years later, those same exact people who they had protected were now part of the Haganah, and they were the ones destroying the village of Al Ma'in and forcibly displacing and ethnically cleansing the villagers. It's just one of many countless stories.
And all these settlements in the so-called Gaza envelope, again, the term envelope is an Israeli term that describes what they were trying to do to Gaza to contain it. You put something in an envelope. But all of these settlements were built on ethnically cleansed land, on villages like Al Ma'in, with the purpose of preventing the return of the Palestinians who belong to this land and whose land this is. Often they were actually military garrisons like Nahal Oz, which was founded by soldiers of the Nahal Brigade and was a military garrison, and then later became a so-called civilian settlement, although none of them really are really civilians. I mean, they're civilian in the sense that Israel uses civilians as human shields for its land theft. Land that it has stolen, it sticks civilian settlers on, and then and uses them literally to protect itself from Palestinian resistance. But really, I hope people read the story, because it, again, this is an example of Israeli media, not to idealize Israeli media because it's still extremely biased and propagandistic, but to say that even Israeli media is talking about Israel killing its own citizens. And as we talked about last week with Bryce Green, the US media is simply ignoring this. You can get these testimonies in Israeli media, but not in the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN. But Asa, throwing this over to you, we may be able to get some of it more from Al Jazeera very soon, right?
Yeah, hopefully. Just one quick point on the kibbutzim. A comment from a viewer here. Israel uses kibbutzim as human shields. There is one of these kibbutzim which is literally called Magen, which is Hebrew for shield.
Mm-hmm.
So, that kind of says it all. As a point that I've made in previous articles about the 7th of October military assault. And it's not so, like you said, Ali, it's not so easy to call these settlements civilian settlements, because yes, there are civilians in them, but they kind of blur the line in a lot of ways. There are military encampments in them quite a lot of the time, and
most of the time, yeah. I mean, there's at least surveillance towers and outposts, yeah.
So yes, on the Al Jazeera documentary, I wrote this article this week about this new Al Jazeera documentary, which should be coming out soon, hopefully. Our understanding now is that it should hopefully come out next week. They've released some clips about it, but we've managed to view it, and what it does confirm is what we've been reporting all along, which is that Israel did kill Israelis on the 7th of October. And it's an interesting documentary, like one of the most interesting. I think all of us here have seen it now, actually, and it'd be interesting to get all your takes on it, actually. And the thing I found most interesting about it that was useful to me was they interviewed this former British military officer and artillery officer, Chris Cobb-Smith. And our regular viewers and listeners will know how many times we've seen we've played on this live stream footage and images like this. There's one on the screen here from one of the kibbutzes, and we've said so many times, usually more dramatic footage than this, where there's complete, as this military officer describes it, catastrophic structural damage of kibbutzim houses completely flattened, essentially, looking very similar to what's going on in Gaza. And we've said, so many times, there's no way that was done by Hamas, because they have, they have light weapons, they have RPGs and so forth. But here in this documentary, you have a former British artillery officer, nonetheless, saying there's no way this was exactly what we were saying, but, sort of validating it from a military perspective, from an actual, military expert who has been in an army. And even in the case of this particular photo on the screen here, which I wouldn't have been so, personally certain about, that it couldn't have been done. He said that was not done by RPGs. That was his view, that would have been done by a heavy weapons system. The implication being that it could only have been done by the Israelis. So that's something, that's a validation that I found there from it.
Yeah, it's a good, as Asa said, we were able to preview it, and I hope everyone will be able to watch it very soon. in the next few days. I hope and expect Al Jazeera will air it. It's a good film. It of course, as with anything, you watch it and you think, I might have made a different choice. But overall, it tells the story. It addresses the reality of what happened and also what didn't happen. It really does a good job showing just how much lying Israel and its various spokespeople have done about October 7th, including the fake, all the fake atrocity stories about beheaded babies and so on. And I think they do count a sort of a minimum number of people they could say with some certainty were likely killed by Israeli forces on October 7th, but we can't take that, and I'm not sure how much of the film we should reveal, because we were allowed to see a preview, but I think we should. I don't know how much we should say, but basically, sorry.
I think we're allowed to say what we've seen.
All right. Well, that's fine. Yeah. So they put a figure of several dozen that they could confirm. I don't remember the exact number, but it's in that order, that they could confirm were killed in these friendly fire incidents. But I think the important takeaway from that is this is a minimum. These are the ones they could say with certainty. What they're not accounting for is, for example, those huge scenes we saw of dozens or hundreds of incinerated cars shot by helicopters. Remember, of course, the 200 people that Israel admitted they couldn't tell if they were, Palestinians or Israelis. So I think the film is important in sort of taking stock of what we know up to this point. And again, doing that within their constraints of, they've only got 50 minutes or whatever it is to do it. But it's not a substitute for a full investigation and continued investigation of what happened on October 7th. So it's great. I think they did a great job with it, but we'll still need to keep pulling at some of these threads. And I can tell you we're working on additional stories on October 7th that we'll be looking forward to telling you about in coming weeks.